Hello and welcome to Unsilenced. My name is Shelby Smith. I'm here with Ashley this evening, who has agreed to sit down and share a bit about her VCUG experience. So without further ado, Ashley, would you like to take it away and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Ashley. I'm 19 years old and I'm from Ontario, Canada. And I had two VCUGs. I had one when I was a baby and one when I was around 2 or 3 years old. It changed me completely. It changed my entire personality. I went from being a very happy and social kid to being someone who was very introverted and reserved and almost scared of people. I didn't really reach out to people first as a kid to, make friends and to do all those kinds of things. And I remember that when those people would want to hug me, I would just not want anything to do with that. And I wouldn't want anyone to be near me except for my parents, which is where I kind of became very clingy to them, and anytime we went anywhere, I was just clinging to them.
That was something I demonstrated as well as a kid, going from being very adventurous and outgoing to the clingy, anxious kid, and it just didn't make a lot of sense. At that age, did you have any idea what was going on, or was it just a general sense of something's off with me?
So I don't remember even having feelings, just kind of I was doing everything unconsciously and I wasn't at all connected to any part of myself.
Such an apt way to describe it. I still can't believe it took me 26 years to know what it feels like to actually be in my body. That's an insane feeling to feel for the first time in your 20s. So you had some memory of what was going on, but it wasn't until your teen years that you really put the pieces together. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I actually had a teacher who I think looked like one of the doctors who did the VCG. There was a scenario where I was taken to school by my mom, and I hadn't even been in school age yet, but she was just trying to get me accustomed to the environment. And I saw this teacher and I screamed, "I hate that man," at him. This was my first time seeing him. I never knew him from anywhere. Then I had him as my grade 2 teacher. And so that year was very bad for me. That was my worst academic year of my entire life.
It sounds like it was a subconscious thing too.
Very much it was. I had no idea. When I screamed, "I hate that man," at him, I had no consciousness. I was just, I don't know.
It just came out.
It just came out, yeah.
Yeah. You had this encounter with this man that was just very peculiar in a way. Was that a red flag to either your family or your teachers? Did someone kind of notice what was going on?
No. My parents didn't really pay it much attention. They thought it was odd, but they were
what could it be?
Yeah.
Did you ever experience any sort of continued medical issues as a kid or any unexplained health issues?
Yeah, I had a lot of stomach aches as a kid. I would eat dinner, have a stomach ache. Stomach aches all the time. There was one summer where I had migraines so bad that I was throwing up.
And then you were also a late diagnosis for a learning disorder as well, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell us a little bit about your experience going to see that doctor for the first time in I don't even know how long?
Yeah, so that was very difficult for me. Yeah, so I avoided doctors for my whole life until I was 18 or 19. Obviously, I mentioned the stomach aches, and I had different issues like that. And I had a lot of mental health issues as well, especially in puberty and onward. And my parents would always be like, "Okay, well, we're going to take you to the doctor." And I would always be like, "No. There's no way. There's no chance you're taking me to the doctor. I'm not going." Avoidance of medical care has been a very huge issue for me, and I feel like that's definitely a very under-recognized barrier to medical care, medical PTSD, and a lot of people don't realize that. So it was very difficult to see a doctor for the first time to get diagnosed with ADHD, and especially the fact that I was seeing a male doctor because there were no female doctors that could diagnose ADHD near me. Apart from seeing a doctor, even just being in medical settings has always been difficult. For me, I never really struggled too much with dental settings, which I know a lot of other survivors have struggled with, so I'm thankful. Going into medical settings is a continued challenge for me, and it never gets easier. It just kind of is something that you have to do, but I still avoid it as much as I can.
Yeah, which really sucks because in a way, we had this procedure done that has been repeatedly proven to be similar to child sexual abuse, which fuels these health issues, these trauma responses, and then the irony being we have no intention of stepping anywhere near a clinic ever again. So definitely a catch-22 for a lot of girls.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the subject, would you mind sharing a little bit about what inspired you to go into the psychiatry field?
Yes. So, okay, here's the thing. I actually have always, I think, wanted to be a psychiatrist, especially after all of my mental illness that I experienced through puberty. I feel like that kind of solidified me wanting to work in mental health and contribute something to that because I felt kind of like that was my purpose. And I still feel like that. I still feel like psychiatry and everything to do with the nervous system is my purpose. I actually, for a while, was kind of I can't be a psychiatrist because I can't even go into a medical setting. So who am I to go and just be a doctor? Second of all, I never thought that it was something within my capabilities. I feel like I was, especially like with the self-hate that this procedure gives you, I never believed in myself, and I was like, medical school is hard and I'm not going to be able to do it. There was a point where I kind of was able to shed all of my self-hating behaviors, and I was able to realize that if anyone can do it, I can do it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like what was once your weakness is now your strength. And I think a lot of that power, that empowerment comes from just knowing what happened to us, right? And
Yeah.
being able to stand up with other people who are like, hey, over here, like, this happened to me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
When you said this test just really didn't make you believe in yourself anymore, what impacts would you say that this procedure had on your mental health, like especially like in puberty? Were there any concerning or alarming behaviors you were exhibiting?
Yeah, so I was suicidal and I was self-harming all throughout that time of my life. I think that is kind of when everything that was bottled up was starting to hit the fan.
Yeah, the self-harm is another big one. I know I've discussed that myself.
Self-hate was definitely a big one. Self-hate, I think that also kind of was contributed to by bullying, which is, a part of being neurodivergent as well. Being a trauma survivor is definitely very isolating, especially when you're a kid and you don't know that you are a trauma survivor. So it kind of isolates you in a way because you kind of have bigger things to deal with than all of the other kids. You don't really know what's going on in your own head and your own body. It's difficult.
And when it's that difficult for kids, and you just look around and you can't find the problem and you're not sure where like the feelings in your body are coming from, but you don't like them, and so you just keep trying thing after thing after thing to feel more comfortable in your own skin. And if you can't find anything, it probably means it's you. That's just a natural thought progression for a kid to have.
That's exactly it. When you're a kid and you have this procedure, it's like you don't perceive it as them helping you. You perceive it as them doing something bad to you. They're hurting you. And to have people hurting you constantly throughout your life over and over again, it convinces you that there's something wrong with you. Because why else would people be continuing to hurt you?
Do you think that this test set you up for continued abuse into adulthood?
Absolutely. And it's not like something that you are conscious of, I think, until you learn more about this trauma. The pattern definitely carries through in your life. It's not a conscious thing. It's very much like it teaches you kind of an inherent belief. I guess what I want doesn't matter because I screamed and I tried to tell the doctors to stop and they didn't. And so it's definitely a thing of learned helplessness where what can you do when no one's listening to you? And that pattern, when it's instilled in you in such a young age, there's nothing else that could happen other than that it continues.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we can move on to how it feels to finally connect with fellow survivors. I believe you were the very first girl to pop up in the Zoom room that night when I was sitting nervously in front of my laptop. What was that feeling like for you when you connected with me, Molly, and Kathleen that first night?
That was, there's so much to say. I have so much to say about that because that meant more to me than you guys would ever realize. I closed my laptop after that Zoom meeting and I cried and I jumped around and I blasted music and I cried. It was such an unreal feeling. It's not something I ever thought I would get to have. I hoped that I would have it for a lot of my life, but I kind of doubted it. I was in the Reddit and I was like, I had that, but I don't know if I'll ever get to actually see someone in person. But
a real name and a real face.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. That really was crucial to my healing journey because before that, I was in a very, very bad mental headspace. Kind of almost reverted back to how I felt when I was a preteen. So I struggled a lot in the months leading up to meeting you guys. And in April, which is the month before our first Zoom, I guess, in April, I struggled a lot to picture a future for myself, and especially a future where I could, be happy and like feel fulfilled. Because I've connected with you guys, I feel like I found that future and I'm living in it, which is just such a blessing.
Yeah, I know when I got off that call, I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh and cheer or cry, so I did both, and it just felt right. I also relate to what you said about not being able to like picture a future. So you mentioned you found those studies in October. October 2022 was the month I found out I even had this test, and I also could not envision a future. And I think the cruelest part of that was just looking at my past, seeing a bunch of issues, a bunch of suicidality, a bunch of self-harming, and then looking at a future that I thought I had and was okay at best, but in a way, like they were both stolen from me. And I'm just sitting here in like the middle, like, how do I connect this? And so I'm also very grateful to have connected with you, and still just like in shock to see you pop up on the Zoom screen. I still think about that day a lot.
Me too.
But yeah, thank you for showing up.
I can't imagine it any other way. Like I knew deep down that it was something that I had to do.
What is the biggest way that the VCUG impacted your adult life?
There are many ways. I think maybe the biggest one would probably be avoidance of medical care, because there are so many issues that I could go to the doctor for right now. Like I feel like I have heart problems, and yet I don't know if
it's like not even worth it sometimes to...
Exactly. And so there's that. I think that's definitely a huge one. Intimacy is a relatively like big one, and it's not something that it's very hard to...
That's okay. It's hard to talk about.
Yeah, it really is. It's not something that I can see myself trusting anyone with for a very long time. It feels a little bit isolating too, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm very happy that I've been able to kind of take things at my own pace. So, yeah.
I mean, honestly, whatever makes you feel most at home in your own skin is like a win for us,
Yeah.
Would you say that dissociation was a common theme in your childhood and or adulthood?
Yes, absolutely. Dissociation, I was dissociated until like 7 or 8. I think I kind of broke out of my dissociation once I got my childhood cat. That's my theory. I definitely struggled with dissociation, not just dissociative amnesia, but also just dissociation in general. I would look in the mirror and I would stare at myself, and that was like some of the only times that I could actually feel like I was in my body and real, and other people were real as well. And since then, I have had other experiences with dissociation in adulthood. I even had an experience with depersonalization one time a couple years ago, and that was, I didn't know it at the time that it was depersonalization, but that was very scary for me. It was terrifying because I was like, what is going on? I felt like I couldn't control what I was saying, and I was at work, so it was very scary, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why it was going on, but yeah.
I think I experienced that for the first time very recently too, and it was absolutely terrifying. Like I thought I'd seen it all. Like I thought I'd been through the worst of it, and I was like, this is something else. Like this is not normal. What do I do? You kind of like black out, It's like, what did I say? What am I saying? What are the words coming out?
Yeah, no, I literally don't remember what I said. So scary. It was like tunnel vision, but also I can't see anything. And I like have to just trust that what I'm saying is gonna be like okay. Like I don't even,
Yeah, honestly, like you're surrendering control to yourself, but you don't get to watch it happen in live time. You have to roll back the tape, and that's scary. Do you feel like your parents fully understand this procedure and its effects on you?
I don't think so. I don't think really anyone can fully understand this procedure and the effects that it has unless you went through it. But I have, talked to my mom about it, and she, I think, understands much more now. So that's good. And I think a big part of surviving this procedure is that your parents feel a lot of guilt, and it's really hard to watch them struggle with that. But
it's almost like you're stuck in this no man's land. I particularly relate to the hardships around family, especially in childhood. And it's almost like you were so desperate for help, and you've been so desperate for so long that you were looking for any possible way, any avenue to get that. And there are times when, as adults and as parents, all our family hears is the blame and the outcome and the fact that they caused it, when in reality the disconnect is causing additional harm.
This is exactly how I feel. They perceive it as like blame, which is like so hard to, it's put such a strain on the relationship.
Yeah, it's almost like you can never really see eye to eye on it, but
Yeah.
it's wonderful to hear that, your parents are trying to understand and seem to understand. I think that's the biggest thing that, any parent or caregiver or family member can do for a survivor of this test is just be there, be open, lend them your ear, and do your best to understand. Most survivors already know. There's a pretty good chance they will never totally understand it, but at the very least, feeling heard and at least getting that effort goes a long, long way.
Yeah.
Have you ever shared this traumatic experience with any member of the healthcare community? And if so, how were you received at those times?
Yeah. So I have shared that, and actually I've had generally very good responses from the healthcare providers who I've shared it with. Yeah, I don't think they fully understood it though. When you go to a doctor and you say, I haven't been to a doctor in a decade and a half, they're gonna say like, why? Like there's definitely something there. So I feel like I was kind of lucky almost in that situation to not have doubt about, you know what I mean? Like I haven't been to a doctor in a decade and a half. So it was very much like they believed my avoidance of medical care, and they, I guess, understood the severity of it. So
Yeah.
there was that. So that was good. I remember my family doctor back in March was like, "Do you feel anxious right now?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do a little bit." Because like I always will feel a little bit anxious, no matter how, comfortable the other healthcare providers trying to make me feel. But I feel like that was a nice question to have because, you know,
Yeah, that was like
making
very
sure that,
interactive.
yeah.
Yeah. That just that makes me so happy to hear, Ashley. I'm so, so glad that you were able to have that because every survivor deserves it. And
Yeah.
hopefully more people will learn about it.
Yeah, but at the same time, all the doctors that I brought it up to have been, good about it. But I would say there's certain situations, like say if you're going to get your blood drawn, these are situations where it's like you have healthcare providers doing this and they're kind of just trying to get things done as fast as possible, and they don't really pay attention to you too much and pay attention to how you're feeling while this is all happening. And I remember I had kind of an experience where I was having my blood drawn and I felt very much like just another like,
Hog in the
you know,
machine, like churn them
hog
in
in the
and
machine,
out.
exactly. And I felt like I wasn't really being cared for in that situation, and I felt like almost things weren't being done correctly. Like they removed like the needle from my arm, and it really hurt. So I was like, they were doing it so fast that it was like they almost physically hurt me, and that was very, very triggering for my medical PTSD. So even though I've had good responses from the doctors, there are situations where you go to medical settings and it's such like a fast-paced thing and they want to get you through that you don't even get to tell them like, hey, I had this like traumatic experience in a medical setting, so you have to be gentle with me.
Yeah. It's like, in a way, like you're
Yeah.
not even receiving care. Like, I feel like that word is like, I don't know, kind of like a blanket term now, but it's like care. What does that word mean? And how can we improve that? Because it's a given fact that the majority of people have some type of trauma. And so it's safe to assume that a lot of people, especially women, have medical and sexual trauma. And that matters. How did it feel to come across the study that quotes in the literature many children experience this test as a violent rape, especially little girls?
Even as you read that, I feel my heart like just shattering. Because it's like I don't know how to describe it. It's very much a
There's
thing
like
of
no words.
there's no words for it. I think when I read that, I just everything stopped and I was like, wait, what? It made sense to me, but it was so hard for me to actually like digest. It made sense because being a kid, you have this procedure and then you show all the signs of child sexual abuse. So I was like, okay, that's why. And I knew that to an extent, but then to see that written out in writing, it was very validating, but it was so difficult. I mean, I kept going back to that weeks and weeks and weeks after, and it just made me cry every time. How can that not make you
I
cry?
know, and there's so many like layers to the grief. You're emotional for yourself, but then you realize that this is still happening. The numbers are astounding, and just considering how many kids are still going through it. I know personally, when I looked up this test, it took me forever to figure out the name. I assumed that it was not being performed, and there was no question in my mind. And so the shock of seeing that it was, in addition to being falsely promoted as safe and harmless and painless, was kind of like a double whammy. Just working through those layers of grief, it took me about 8 months just to be fit enough to trust myself, to care for myself, and like safeguard my life.
Yeah, and you said like the part about kind of the stages of grief. For me, the most painful part of it was imagining myself when I was that age and that happening to me, because it's hard to remember. I have one memory from it, but that's it. But to imagine it from a third perspective, as if I was like a fly on the wall, it's so hard.
Yeah, I feel like our brains take us in crazy directions when we're replaying this in our head, but that is the only scene I refuse to go into. You are absolutely correct. It is the hardest part. Imagining a child, like not us, not adults, but a child. After learning about this and starting to process it, would you say that maybe you regained a little bit of that self-esteem you were missing as a kid?
It took me a little while after that. I think my self-love kind of developed after my preteen years. I was able to look back and see how much I had hated myself, and I realized that that was a very big part of why I was struggling so hard mentally. I feel like that was kind of a breakthrough there. But I think as far as self-compassion goes, I think I have only very recently begun to develop that. Yeah, I don't know, it's always been a difficult thing for me. I've always talked to myself, like in my head, like as if I was my own bully. And I have been kind of trying to recognize that more, and stop that.
Yeah, the inner critic. Reading the words inner critic for the first time on a page, I just went, ugh, like, yeah, that's a problem I've had for a while. It's a problem everyone has, but especially people like us.
Yeah.
Obviously, this test is still the gold standard to diagnose who you are in pediatric patients today. What feelings do you have about that?
It shouldn't be true at all. Like, it's so simple. It's so funny because, you know, we have gotten some attention on social media with the truth about this, and so many people just are in disbelief. And just like you said, you were like, there's no way that they could still be performing this, knowing that it's pretty much, you know, child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, we can't be doing this anymore. There are alternatives, and even if there wasn't, they should be in development, because even if these tests were only performed when they were completely necessary, and even if they diagnosed perfectly, they are still causing trauma that is equivalent to sexual abuse. What other, like, how can you justify that from a risk versus benefit standpoint? The effects of this procedure include becoming actively suicidal. If you're just gonna, you know,
brush that under the rug.
Yeah. I think it's also kind of a thing of doubting the validity of mental health as a whole and psychiatry as a whole. If you're dying from, like, we'll use the example of cancer. If you're dying from cancer, it's so much more severe than if you are about to, you know, go through with ending your own life.
Yeah, the outcome is the same. It's the outcome is death.
When it comes to mental health, it's very much a thing of like, okay, well then just don't. You know, just don't kill yourself, or just
don't do it.
Yeah. Literally. Yeah. Or just don't, like, have mental health struggles. Like, just cheer up. Not how it works at all. And that's very much a problem with the culture and the stigma surrounding psychiatry and everything to do with that.
And you're probably, like, very well versed on these subjects, but I wish more people understood the work that Nadine Burke-Harris is doing and what she has learned, because again, we keep somehow unearthing studies and research that dates back for decades and has consistently proven that mental health problems and trauma, they not only result in mental illnesses, they result in physical health problems, and yes, death. Like, it's the same.
Yeah, I need people to know this. Our nervous system is not any different from our other bodily systems. And just because it has some sort of magical thing to it where it's like our neurons are conducting signals doesn't make it any less real than being able to touch your skin. Your nervous system is also connected to all of the other systems. Like that's the main computer in the body. And when that's dysregulated, everything else is dysregulated.
There's no homeostasis here. Like we're living in
Yeah.
survival mode, and we're not talking about survival mode for a few years. We're talking an entire childhood, and for many people, most of their adulthood too. Honestly, it hurts to consider the extent of the damage we could be looking at. If you could share one thing with the healthcare community with almost a sort of guaranteed immunity, and everyone had to listen to you, what would you want them to know?
That is such a good question. As someone who's going into the medical community, there's a few things. I really want trauma-informed care to be something that every single doctor practices. I want that to be in every medical school curriculum. Just as I said before, the nervous system affects every other system, and you can't just pretend like it's independent from everything in the body. So I think that trauma-informed care is very, very important. I mean, there's many examples of what that could look like, but if we're not going to do the alternatives to VCUG, then you at least have to give some warning, and you have to tell us, okay, this could be pretty traumatic, and you might want to put your kid in therapy, and you might want to give them these resources. The other thing that I really want the medical community to know, especially doctors, is I really want doctors to recognize the power that they have in their patient-doctor interactions, and I want them to realize that the doctor knows best when it comes to the wide array of conditions that a patient could have. They know everything about the conditions, they know everything, they know how to diagnose the conditions, they know how to treat the conditions, but only the patient knows best when it comes to like their own health. Only the patient is the expert on their own mind and body and everything concerning that. So if you're a doctor and you're misdiagnosing patients, you don't know enough about this patient. And you are also responsible for creating an environment where they feel comfortable enough to tell you everything about what's going on with them.
Yeah, that's an ethical obligation.
Exactly. So I feel very much like doctors need to realize that patients know themselves best, always.
Yeah, and the words that always pop into my head, especially recently, is being an active participant in your healthcare. I realized that because I didn't get that option as a kid, I didn't know that was an option as an adult, and I have had just such a series of horrific experiences. I reported a doctor at an emergency room, which I was in a lot for self-harm. I reported him for sexual misconduct, which indeed happened, and they did nothing about it. So these issues don't stop once you're done seeing a pediatrician. You carry them with you, and the abuse continues, and those beliefs don't change, they don't evolve. And that's largely because medical professionals are so revered and respected, as they should be, as experts in their field, and as they should be in 2023, where scientific validity and fact is like less important to many Americans. I hope Canada is faring better, but yeah.
Patient advocacy is a very important thing because there are so many studies that prove that when the patient is actively involved in their own care, they have better health outcomes. And that's like just,
Fact.
And it makes so much sense too. I think that the issue, as I was saying before, is the doctors knowing best. Some doctors take that and they're like, okay, well, I'll give all these medications to my patient and I don't have to tell them why. I don't have to tell them anything about it because they'll trust me and they'll know that it'll all work out. When in reality, patients need to know everything about their condition and they need to know everything about why their treatment looks the way it does in order to feel secure and to feel that trust and to feel like it's going to work. That's the thing about the VCUG is that, we did not know anything about what was going on. There was no aspect there at all of patient understanding. There was no aspect of patient advocacy. We didn't have any voice in that matter. I mean, that's the case when you're a kid because your parents give informed consent for you, but that doesn't mean that the doctor should just not tell you anything about what's going on and leave you in the dark.
Yeah, it's so messy. It's so messy. Ironically, I think that's one of the biggest things that makes it eerily comparable to sexual abuse as well, is just the factor of family secrecy. When I read that in a study for the first time, I believe it was actually a study about intersex kids, which typically reap similar trauma. Because so many parents go into it thinking it's one thing, but it's not, because they were not properly informed. When they come out of it, they often develop secondary trauma. And even if they don't want to think about putting a label on that, it doesn't change the fact that they are not prepared to give their child adequate care and support for what they are about to go through. We are setting the families and the parents up to fail. So by making them uncomfortable and uncertain and hesitant, but also falsely promoting this test, we are encouraging a sense of familial secrecy because no one wants to talk about it, which is why people like me and you don't find out forever, it feels like.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The parents don't know that it's something to be concerned about, and so it's never talked about.
What advice would you share with other women who are in the beginning stages of either processing or finding out about their VCUG trauma?
That's a good one. I have to think about that one for a second.
It's like surprisingly weird to answer. I feel like I want to throw a lot of information at people, like you should do this and this and this and this and just love yourself. There's so much.
It's so hard because it's like if I'm imagining like myself in that position when I was first kind of discovering it, I don't think there is much that I could have told myself to make me feel better. I think a very important part of healing is connecting with people, even if it's not other survivors, although I think that the best thing is to have other survivors tell you, but have other people tell you that you're not alone, and a bunch of affirmations basically that we survivors kind of lack in childhood. You're not alone, you're not dramatic, you're not flawed, that there's nothing inherently wrong with you, and there is an explanation for why everything in your life has happened to you, and every way that you feel now, there's an explanation for it. I think that's one of the most comforting things about the healing journey and finding out.
I really liked what you said at the beginning about there was nothing I could have told myself to make myself feel better. Like, I truly don't think that. And when you said that, I realized that's something I believe too, which is so frustrating because in the moment you're like, how do I make this better? I do not want to feel like this anymore. And it's almost like a double-edged sword. It's like a gift because it's like, hey, here's the missing puzzle piece that tells you everything you need to know. But also, your life's going to suck for a little bit longer, I guess.
Yeah, for me, it kind of is the same thing as if you were to try to comfort someone who is suicidal. There's no way that you can make them feel better. In that state of mind, it's very much like you just have to feel the feelings. You just have to trust that one day you'll feel at least a little bit better. And one day you will slowly start to be able to connect with other people who are so similar to you and understand you in ways that you never thought anyone could. And slowly you will start to heal and feel better. And of course, it's not a linear thing, but it'll happen. And you just have to trust that it'll happen.
That is such great advice, Ashley. Thank you so much. I feel like you touched on a very unique thing that I haven't even heard or considered yet, which is in a way you're still going to be powerless. It's going to feel like you're powerless, but you're not. And as much as your life might have sucked up till now, there's a better feeling for you that you will feel at some point. I think just having that hope of slightly better is so helpful, especially for people coming out of suicidality.
Exactly. That's the thing. When I was a preteen, I was very much in a headspace of it's never gonna get better. It's never gonna get better. I should just, end it all now. But and it's very difficult when you're in your healing journey and you've watched things get better, but then maybe you have a setback and everything just kind of falls down and falls apart around you, and you're it's
the worst. It's the worst.
Yeah, it's you think to yourself, I thought that I was getting better, but now I'm back where I was before. And then a little part of you will wonder, what if it never truly gets better and it's always just me relapsing into these awful mental states? But even if that is something that happens, I think that living for the times when it's better is worth it.
Yeah, that was so well said. That was me being dramatic to my therapist a month ago. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm back at square one. And she's like, Shelby, you learn something new every time. I'm like, no, I don't. I'm done.
Yeah. It's so true. You do always learn something new. I feel just over the past year, it's been a very difficult past year, but I've definitely learned so much. And I feel that's something that I've learned is it will get better, at least for a moment, at least for a song. You put on a song and it's at least while I'm listening to this song, then maybe everything won't be so awful And then
Yeah.
slowly, like, you build up those moments until it's not so difficult.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. That I was so stubborn when it comes to like taking that advice specifically. It's like, well, I don't want a taste of what it feels like. I want it now. Like I deserve it now. And that's the sad reality is that we all deserve it. We always have. A
Yeah.
habit I've like tried, which has worked very well for that, is taking a picture anytime I realize that I'm happy. So like in moments of contentment, it's just such an alien feeling that I just take a picture wherever I'm at, whatever I'm doing. And even if they look super bizarre later down the road, it's like, well, I remember how I felt in that moment and I felt normal and I felt happy. And there were times that lasted 5 seconds because I was like eating a snack and I realized I was like at peace in my body. And I was like, this is nice. Take a picture of my snack, you know?
I
Yeah.
really love that. I think I'm going to start doing that too.
Yeah, I highly recommend it, and I cannot take credit for it. It was from a TikTok influencer who is amazing and does amazing things for mental health, so it pairs very nicely with your advice.
Yeah.
Would you want to answer what has been most or least helpful to you during your healing journey?
Most helpful, connecting with other people. You hear about how their experience with EMDR, and you hear about the books they read, and you get like so much resources out of just connecting with people. And then obviously there's the aspect of like, wow, these people exist. They understand me. Connecting with everyone was probably the thing that changed everything for me. I think that has been kind of the most helpful. Not only do you get relational healing, but you also get all the resources. I think least helpful might be social media.
Yes, agree.
Yeah, and it's so hard because this is a thing that has deeply affected me, and it's, changed the whole course of my life, and it's intrinsic to everything that I am, everything about who I am. And there's people online saying, oh, well, you're just being dramatic. It's hard to describe how that feels to read those things. And I can't imagine how you feel to actually be on the very receiving end of it. I think it's more harmful than the people who do it might think.
Absolutely.
It's very triggering. Another thing that's kind of not very helpful in the healing journey, I guess, as a survivor, you have to realize when you are becoming triggered, when you're not in a headspace to consume even just survivor stories. You have to realize when you are able to read that and when you shouldn't be consuming that stuff.
And that's so challenging. That is so challenging. Yeah, that kind of ties in like the social media thing for me. Like if I could tell the haters like one thing, it'd be that. That's what I would want to tell them, is that we are still figuring this out. We are not just activists. We are not outraged parents. Many of us don't foresee even a future with kids because of what happened to us. When you see the words violent rape in a study that is well documented and was completed years ago, decades ago, I just wish these people would stop to consider the impact that words can have on traumatized people who have fought tooth and nail to get where they are today, who have attempted to take their own life, who have harmed their bodies, who have been living in a state of eternal dysregulation forever. Think about it before you post.
That's the thing. It's like you are telling people who have barely scraped by to be alive to this day that they are dramatic. And that's like telling a cancer survivor. Okay, I don't want to compare though.
Because it just stirs more hate, but it's true.
Yeah, it's like if mental health were treated as equal to physical health, then that would be like telling a cancer survivor, you're just being dramatic.
You should have an appetite after chemo. What are you talking about? Quit being dramatic, I guess.
Yeah.
So what does the future look like for Ashley? Like, what do you hope to see in your future? And maybe share what closure would look like to you. Is that something you think you can get?
I don't really know yet if closure is something that is within reach. I think I'll kind of figure that out as I go. Something like this happening at such an early age, as I said earlier, central to who I am. It's kind of my purpose to help kids who kind of were maybe in my situation. And so I want to become a psychiatrist, but not only that, I want to do research in psychiatry, and I'm very eager to understand the relationship between trauma and all other aspects of health. There's been so much done on that, the ACE study, so much, and yet no one is paying attention to it. And I want people to pay attention to it. I want people to realize the actual impact of trauma. And I want to do groundbreaking research on that. I want people to realize, how much more at risk you are to become a person with a disability after trauma. And
Autoimmune diseases, like everything.
Exactly. And I want so badly trauma-informed care to be a part of every medical school curriculum, as I said, and a part of every doctor's practice. But of course, I still want to help, patients individually, and that's why I still want to be a psychiatrist and not just a researcher. But yeah, that's sort of what my future will look like, and maybe I'll find closure through that. As far as other aspects of my future, such as being a parent, I'm not sure if that's something that I could ever do. I don't know if I could ever go through pregnancy and childbirth. I don't know if I could ever go to a gynecology appointment.
Same.
I don't know if having a kid is something that I could do. I guess we'll have to see how my healing goes and if I ever reach that point.
Yeah. And I mean, just a gem I've had to learn and then relearn is that it's up to me, but it's not up to my timing. So I get to actively make choices for my life now for what feels like the first time ever. And that's so liberating, but you can't rush it and you can't foresee what comes next. All we can do is live in the present. And I know that sounds so cheesy, but it has just helped me immensely overcome dissociation and wondering, am I in the right place? Am I with the right people? Am I in the right job? What should I be doing? Did I miss any opportunities? And it's no, it's okay. You survived a lot and it's gonna work out,
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm so excited to see what you do in your field because I think you have very similar characteristics to so many of the pioneers in this area, like Bessel van der Kolk and Nadine. We love Nadine. She's amazing. I'm just so excited to see all the good you do in the world.
Shelby, that's the sweetest compliment I've ever received, I feel like.
That's what I'm here for. I can't take compliments, but I give them. The struggle.